Imagine you are the most powerful man in the global auto industry, a titan, a legend. You are hailed as a savior in one country and a corporate genius in another. You are le cost killer, the man who achieved the impossible, the executive who runs 3 Fortune 500 companies at the same time. Then, in an instant, it's all over. You step off your private jet at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, not into a waiting limousine, but into the disorienting glare of flashing cameras and the cold grip of authority. You are no longer a CEO. You are a prisoner. This was the reality for Carlos Ghosn on November 19, 2018. The Ghosn shock sent tremors through the entire automotive world. It was a scandal of epic proportions, a corporate drama that had everything: money, power, accusations of a palace coup, and eventually a spectacular escape from justice that saw a global icon smuggled out of Japan, hidden inside a musical instrument case. The headlines wrote themselves. The story was irresistible. But what if this shocking event, the arrest of a global icon, wasn't the cause of Nissan's crisis? What if it was merely the moment the fever broke, the point where the symptoms became too violent to ignore? The story of Nissan's dramatic fall from grace is not the story of one man's alleged crimes. It is the story of a sickness with a long incubation period. It's a cautionary tale of how a company, once saved in a legendary turnaround, became hollowed out from the inside by a dysfunctional alliance, a culture of questionable governance, and a catastrophic loss of the very innovative spirit that once made it great. To understand how Nissan truly lost its way, we have to go back to the very moment it was supposedly saved. The year is 1999. Nissan is on the verge of collapse. It's not just struggling, it's dying. The company that gave the world the iconic Datsun Z cars and fuel-efficient sedans during the 1970s energy crisis is now a shadow of its former self. The numbers paint a grim picture. The company is buckling under more than $20 billion in automotive debt, an anchor pulling it into the abyss. For 7 of the previous 8 years, it has posted staggering losses. Its global market share is in a state of managed decline. In its crucial home market of Japan, its market share has been falling against Toyota and Honda. In the United States, a market it once dominated among Japanese brands, sales have shrunk by a catastrophic 25% from their peak in the mid-1980s. The problem is visible on every street corner. The product line has become a sea of uninspired, forgettable cars. The design language is bland, the engineering is conservative, and the brand has lost its identity. Inside the company's headquarters, the situation is even worse. The corporate culture is a textbook example of institutional paralysis. It is an inward-looking, highly centralized and siloed organization where departments don't communicate and a sense of shared purpose is non-existent. Decisions, if they are made at all, take an eternity to pass through layers of bureaucracy. A culture of consensus at all costs means that bold ideas are suffocated in endless reviews and meetings. Risk-taking is a career-ending move, so no one does it. This wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a crisis of identity. The company had become a victim of the bubble economy era's excesses, making poor investments in non-core assets like real estate instead of focusing on what it was supposed to do: build great cars. By 1999, Nissan was a fallen titan, a company adrift, waiting for a miracle or bankruptcy. Into this seemingly hopeless situation walks an outsider, a gaijin, Carlos Ghosn. A Brazilian-born, French-Lebanese executive, Ghosn was dispatched by the French automaker Renault, which had just made a high-stakes gamble by purchasing a 36.8% stake in the dying Japanese automaker for $5.4 billion. Ghosn's reputation preceded him. At Michelin in the 1980s, he had turned around the company's struggling South American operations under conditions of hyperinflation. At Renault, he had earned the moniker Le Cost Killer for his ruthless and brutally effective restructuring of the company. a performance that cemented his status as one of the industry's most formidable turnaround artists. He was exactly the kind of shock the stagnant system needed. In October 1999, Gozen stood before a skeptical Japanese press and unveiled the Nissan Revival Plan, NRP. It wasn't just a plan, it was corporate surgery without anesthetic. He made a stunning promise. If Nissan was not profitable within 1 year, he and his entire executive committee would resign. The promises were audacious, and the actions required were brutal. The plan was a direct assault on the traditions that had paralyzed the company. First, the job cuts. 21,000 positions, representing 14% of Nissan's global workforce, would be eliminated. Second, the factory closures. 5 domestic plants, including the iconic Murayama factory, which had been a symbol of Nissan's post-war industrial might, would be shut down. But the most culturally shocking move was the dismantling of the keiretsu. For decades, Japanese industry had been built on these interwoven webs of loyal suppliers and cross-shareholdings. They were relationships built on loyalty and tradition, not necessarily on price or performance. Gossen, with the cold logic of an outsider, saw this as a source of inefficiency. He centralized purchasing and declared that all supplier contracts would be awarded based purely on merit, on quality, technology, and most importantly, cost. This move earned him the nickname Keiretsu Killer and was seen as a direct attack on the Japanese way of doing business. The success of the NRP hinged on a factor that was both a blessing and a curse: Gosen's absolute authority. As a gaijin, he was not bound by the cultural rules of consensus, seniority, and lifetime employment that had made such radical changes unthinkable for his predecessors. Desperate for a solution, Nissan's board and its new partner Renault granted him the power to act as an autocrat. This concentration of power was necessary for the revival, but it also planted the first seed of the future crisis. It created a culture where one man's word was law, where his authority was absolute, and where dissent was not an option. The cult of Gozen was born. The financial turnaround was astonishingly fast. Just 12 months into the 3-year plan, Nissan had returned to profitability, a year ahead of schedule. By 2002, its automotive debt had been slashed by 50%, and by 2003, it was eliminated entirely. But Gosen understood a fundamental truth. We cannot save our way to success. A company can't shrink its way to greatness. It has to build things people actually want to buy. And for a brief, glorious period, Gosen proved he was not just a cost-cutter, he was a product visionary. The early 2000s saw a stunning renaissance in Nissan's showrooms, a return to the daring and innovation that had been lost for over a decade. It began with the triumphant return of an icon, the 350Z. Launched in 2002, it was a modern, powerful, and affordable sports car that captured the spirit of the original Datsun 240Z. It was an immediate critical and commercial success, a powerful symbol that Nissan's soul was back. Then came the crossovers, a segment Nissan would essentially create. The Nissan Murano, launched in 2002, was a revelation. With its bold, futuristic styling, high-quality cabin, and smooth, powerful V6 engine, it offered a level of sophistication and driving pleasure previously unseen in a mainstream SUV. It was so well executed that some reviewers dubbed it the budget BMW X5. At the same time, Nissan's luxury division, Infiniti, launched its own game-changer, the FX. Built on the same platform as the 350Z sports car, the FX was a muscular, aggressive crossover that handled like nothing else in its class. It was powerful, luxurious, and technologically advanced, introducing features like the world's first lane departure warning system. It was, as one publication later noted, the Porsche Macan a decade before the Macan even existed. The ambition didn't stop there. In 2004, Nissan made an audacious attempt to take on the Detroit Giants in their most profitable segment, the full-size pickup truck. The Nissan Titan was a bold move. It came standard with a powerful 5.6-litre V8 engine, a spacious and well-appointed cabin, and innovative features that made it a genuine competitor to the Ford F-150 and Chevrolet Silverado. This period of incredible product success was critical because it cemented Goson's status as an infallible genius. He had not only saved the company financially, but he had also made it cool again. This success, however, fueled an immense hubris and ambition that would lead directly to the next more destructive phase of his strategy. The success of the Z, Murano, and FX was translated into a new set of purely numerical targets. The Nissan 180 plan, announced in 2002, had explicit goals: sell 1 million more cars globally, achieve an 8% operating margin, and have zero net automotive debt. The focus was already shifting from the qualitative goal of making great cars to the quantitative goal of hitting the numbers. The product renaissance was the peak of Nissan's revival, but it also contained the second seed of the crisis: the volume obsession. The ambition of the Goson era reached its zenith in 2010. With a staggering commitment of over €4 billion from the Renault-Nissan alliance, the company launched the Nissan Leaf. This wasn't just another new model, it was a paradigm shift. The Leaf was the world's first mass-market, affordable, purpose-built electric vehicle. It was a car that promised to change the world. At that moment, Nissan was years, if not a decade, ahead of every other major automaker. Toyota was still focused on its successful but less revolutionary hybrid technology. The American giants were just beginning to emerge from the ashes of the 2008 financial crisis. Volkswagen was years away from its own EV ambitions, and Tesla was still a niche, boutique manufacturer selling a handful of expensive roadsters to Silicon Valley early adopters. Nissan, it seemed, was poised to own the future of motoring. It had the vision, the technology, the manufacturing scale, and the global distribution network to dominate the coming EV revolution. Standing on stage at the Leaf's launch, Goson looked like a man who had not only saved a company, but was now single-handedly steering the entire industry into a new electric era. But as we now know, this was the peak. The company was about to squander its monumental lead. The seeds of the crisis, planted in the fertile soil of its own spectacular success, were about to sprout. After the revolutionary launch of the Leaf, the car that was supposed to define the future of mobility, Nissan did almost nothing. For nearly a decade, the world's first mass-market EV received no significant updates. While competitors like Tesla were rapidly advancing battery technology and expanding their charging infrastructure, the Leaf's range remained largely stagnant. Its charging technology became outdated, and its design felt tired. Its once commanding lead simply evaporated. This wasn't an isolated case of neglect. Across Nissan's entire lineup, the fire of innovation that had burned so brightly in the early 2000s was extinguished. Core models like the Altima and Sentra, the bread and butter of the brand, went years without meaningful redesigns. They became bland, uncompetitive rental fleet specials, known more for their generous discounts than for their quality or design. Worse, they became synonymous with the company's widespread adoption of continuously variable transmissions, or CVT. While efficient on paper, these transmissions developed a notorious reputation for premature failure, leading to costly repairs and further tarnishing the brand's image for reliability. The company that had wowed the world with the daring Murano and the sporty FX was now churning out forgettable appliances. The passion was gone, replaced by a singular, all-consuming obsession. In 2011, Carlos Ghosn stood before investors and announced Nissan Power 88, the company's next grand 6-year plan. The name was a simple, powerful promise. By the end of fiscal year 2016, Nissan would achieve an 8% global market share and a sustainable 8% operating profit margin. It was a breathtakingly ambitious strategy. The plan called for launching a new model every 6 weeks, expanding the global portfolio to 66 vehicles, and aggressively pushing into emerging markets like Brazil, Russia, and India. But beneath the surface of these impressive headline numbers, Power 88 was a declaration of war on the company's own brand. The focus was now entirely and exclusively on volume, at any cost. In the United States, the company's most profitable market, this strategy manifested as a disastrous race to the bottom. To hit the aggressive sales targets, Nissan leaned heavily on tactics that sacrificed long-term health for short-term numbers. The brand became synonymous with heavy discounting and cash-on-the-hood deals, eroding brand value and training customers to never, ever pay the sticker price. A huge percentage of sales were pushed into rental car fleets. This was an easy way to boost the raw sales figures that Gozen demanded, but it had a toxic side effect. A year later, those thousands of low-mileage rental cars would flood the used car market, crushing the resale values for the loyal customers who had paid for their cars with their own money. To move even more metal off the lots, Nissan's financing arm, Nissan Motor Acceptance Corporation, NMAC, began to aggressively pursue subprime lending. They offered loans to customers with poor credit scores who would have been turned away by other lenders, a practice that would later draw the attention of regulators for illegal repossession and collections practices. This strategy boosted sales in the short term, but it came at the cost of brand reputation and long-term financial stability. In China, the world's largest auto market, the strategy was similar in its volume-first approach. The joint venture with state-owned Dongfeng Motor focused on pumping up sales figures by selling older generation models and budget-friendly cars under the local Venusia brand, rather than investing the resources to establish Nissan as a premium, innovative force against global rivals. The Power 88 plan was a perfect example of a strategy that succeeded in its own narrow terms while failing the company it was meant to serve. The obsession with hitting a numerical target led to decisions that hollowed out the very foundations of the brand. While the Nissan brand was being systematically damaged in the public marketplace, the company was rotting from within. The core of the problem was the Renault-Nissan alliance itself, a partnership that had saved Nissan, but was now becoming a source of deep-seated dysfunction. It was a fundamentally lopsided relationship. On paper, Renault was the senior partner, holding a 43.4% controlling voting stake in Nissan. Nissan, in return, owned a 15% stake in Renault, but crucially with no voting rights. This structure, established in 1999 when Renault was the savior, had become increasingly untenable. By the 2010s, Nissan was by far the larger and more profitable company, generating the bulk of the alliance's cash and driving its global growth, particularly in the lucrative US and Chinese markets. This power imbalance created deep and lasting resentment within Nissan's proud Japanese executive ranks. They felt they were being treated not as an equal partner, but as a colonial outpost, a cash cow for their French counterparts. This internal dysfunction began to manifest in the cars themselves. The Common Module Family, CMF architecture, was supposed to be a triumph of synergy, a system for sharing parts and platforms that would save billions and lead to better products. Instead, it often led to compromised, undifferentiated vehicles. The Nissan Rogue and the Mitsubishi Outlander, after Mitsubishi joined the alliance in 2016, became nearly identical twins, built on the same CMF-CD platform, diluting the unique identity of both brands. The process was so fraught with compromise that it often felt to Nissan engineers that they were simply being handed Renault's technology, rather than co-developing it as equals. The simmering tensions finally boiled over in 2015. The French government, led by its ambitious economy minister, Emmanuel Macron, used a new law called the Florange Law to double its voting rights in Renault. This move effectively tightened the French state's control over the entire alliance, including Nissan. To the executives in Yokohama, This was a hostile act, a corporate raid that confirmed their deepest fears. That the ultimate goal was a full takeover of Nissan by Renault, and, by extension, the French government. This was the point of no return. It solidified a belief among a powerful faction within Nissan's Japanese leadership that as long as Carlos Ghosn and the imbalanced alliance structure remained in place, they would never have true autonomy. Ghosn himself was pushing for a full merger of the companies, a move that would make the alliance irreversible and cement his legacy and French control. For the Nissan board, this was an existential threat. The only way to prevent the merger and reclaim their company's sovereignty was to remove the one man holding the entire fragile structure together. The plot was set. The palace coup was now a matter of when, not if. The internal rot finally burst into the public consciousness on that fateful night in November 2018. The arrest of Carlos Ghosn at Haneda Airport was not a random act of justice. It was the meticulously planned culmination of a palace coup that had been years in the making. Nissan executives, led by Ghosn's own hand-picked successor, CEO Hiroto Saikawa, had been conducting their own secret internal investigation into their chairman. They had gathered evidence and cooperated with Tokyo prosecutors, effectively setting a trap for the man who had once saved their company. The world watched, stunned, as Saikawa stood before a packed press conference and systematically dismantled the legacy of his former mentor. He grimly laid out the allegations. Ghosn had underreported his salary to financial regulators by tens of millions of dollars and had misused company funds for personal gain, including the purchase of luxury homes around the world. It was a shocking and brutal public denunciation. For the first time, the world was getting a glimpse of the sickness that had been festering inside Nissan for years. The savior had fallen, and an era of unprecedented chaos was about to be unleashed. The immediate aftermath of Ghosn's arrest was a complete and total power vacuum. The man who had been the singular center of gravity for the entire Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance for 2 decades was gone, and the company he had once led went into an immediate and violent freefall. The irony was swift and brutal. Hiroto Saikawa, the CEO who had led the public charge against Ghosn, was himself forced to resign in September 2019. The reason? A scandal over his own excess compensation, a revelation that proved the rot in Nissan's corporate governance ran far deeper than just one man. What followed was a revolving door of new leaders and new, increasingly desperate turnaround plans. In May 2020, the company announced Nissan Next, a 4-year plan that aimed to restore stability and achieve a modest 5% operating profit margin and a 6% global market share by 2023. But the plan was born into a world of turmoil. It failed to gain any meaningful traction amidst the ongoing internal power struggles, the persistent leadership instability, and the unprecedented global shock of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nissan was adrift in a perfect storm. One might argue that Nissan was simply a victim of bad luck, that the pandemic and supply chain disruptions hit every automaker. But the numbers tell a different, more troubling story. Nissan's collapse was deeper, more severe, and more self-inflicted than that of its rivals. The brand damage from the Power 88 era, combined with a now stagnant product line, proved to be a fatal combination. The most brutal reality was in China. Between the 2018 fiscal year and the 2023 fiscal year, Nissan's sales in what had become its most important market plummeted from over 1.5 million units to just over 800,000. By 2024 and 2025, the market has all but collapsed for the brand. Savvy Chinese consumers, once a reliable source of growth, are now flocking to sophisticated and affordable domestic EV brands like BYD, leaving Nissan's aging, gasoline-powered lineup looking like a relic from a bygone era. In the United States, the story was one of persistent weakness. The brand damage from years of heavy discounting and fleet sales proved impossible to shake. Market share remained stubbornly low, a far cry from the ambitious 8% target of the Gosen era. The company's great hope for an EV comeback, the much-hyped Nissan Ariya, was supposed to be a triumphant return to the pioneering spirit of the Leaf. Instead, due to years of delays, it arrived late to a market already saturated with compelling and more advanced offerings from Tesla, Hyundai, Ford, and Kia. The Ariya landed with a thud, failing to make any significant impact on the market or the company's bottom line. As the financial performance continued to deteriorate, dissenting voices from within the industry grew louder. Some analysts began to openly question whether the company could survive on its own. The warnings became dire. In a shocking statement in November 2024, one Nissan executive was quoted as saying that the company had as little as 12 months to live, barring a major transformative event. The palace coup had succeeded in its primary objective. The old, Renault-dominated alliance was broken. After years of painful and protracted negotiations, Renault finally agreed in early 2023 to a historic rebalancing of the partnership. In a move that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior, Renault agreed to reduce its massive 43% controlling stake in Nissan down to just 15%, placing the remaining 28% of its shares into a French trust. For the first time in over 2 decades, the cross-shareholdings would be equal, and Nissan would regain its voting rights. The deal was framed as a necessary divorce, a way to move forward on more equal footing. It finally gave Nissan's leadership the autonomy and independence they had craved for so long. But it came at a steep price. The rebalancing stripped away the facade of a unified global giant. The synergies, the shared scale, and the pooling of resources, however dysfunctional, were now gone. Nissan was finally on its own, forced to confront the deep-seated problems that had been festering for years, but now as a smaller, weaker, and more isolated company. This brings the story to the present day. July 2025. The company is bleeding cash. Highly anticipated merger talks with its Japanese rival Honda have collapsed after Nissan balked at the idea of becoming a subsidiary rather than an equal partner. With nowhere left to turn, Nissan's new CEO, Ivan Espinosa, announces the most drastic and painful survival plan in the company's long history, Re-Nissan. The plan is a chilling echo of the 1999 revival plan that first brought Carlos Ghosn to fame. But where the NRP was a plan for revival and growth, Re-Nissan is a plan for pure survival. It is a plan for managed decline. The numbers are staggering and speak to the depth of the crisis. Massive cost cuts. The plan calls for 500 billion yen in total cost savings to be achieved by 2026. Global factory closures. 7 of its 17 global factories will be permanently shut down by 2027, a reduction of over 40% of its non-China manufacturing footprint. Workforce reduction. A total of 20,000 jobs will be eliminated globally between 2024 and 2027, representing a significant portion of its remaining workforce. The Re-Nissan plan brings the entire tragic story full circle. The same brutal tactics that Ghosn used to save the company in 1999, mass layoffs and factory closures, are now being deployed again, not to fuel a new era of growth, but simply to keep the company from disappearing entirely. The medicine that once seemed to cure the patient has now become the palliative care to ease its final days. The dramatic arrest of Carlos Ghosn was never the real story. It was the explosive, headline-grabbing symptom of a disease that had been quietly incubating within Nissan for 2 decades. The very plan that saved the company in 1999 ultimately sowed the seeds of its destruction. It created a corporate culture dangerously dependent on a single, autocratic leader, a cult of personality that stifled dissent and honest self-assessment. The spectacular success of that initial revival bred a dangerous hubris, an arrogance that shifted the company's focus away from building great innovative cars and toward a blind, all-consuming chase for market share at any cost. The key takeaways from this corporate tragedy are clear and serve as a warning. A dysfunctional alliance, built on an unstable and resented power dynamic, created bitterness and led to compromised, uninspired products. A catastrophic loss of the innovative spirit that once made Nissan a world beater left it with a bland, uncompetitive lineup in an era of rapid technological change. And a culture of questionable governance, hollowed out from the top and rife with internal conflict, left the company leaderless and adrift in chaos at the worst possible moment. Now, Nissan stands alone, smaller and weaker than it has been in a generation. Its latest plan, Re-Nissan, is a desperate, painful gamble for survival. It leaves us with one final, sobering question. Is this a blueprint for a genuine, second revival? A chance for the company to rediscover the soul it lost? Or are we simply bearing witness to the managed decline of a fallen titan, watching as it slowly fades into the twilight?